Welcome back to another explainer. Today we're doing something a little different. We are stepping right into the shoes of a master detective. We're going to frame our dive into chapter 31 of the classic text Morals and Dogma as this gripping, high-stakes investigation. In this chapter, we meet a fascinating figure known as the Inspector Inquisitor. And our mission today? Well, as truth seekers, we've got to uncover the absolute mechanics of pure understanding. We aren't just kicking around abstract concepts here. We are literally building a precise methodology for how to view the world, process information, and arrive at undeniable truth. Let's get right into it.
Okay, so here's our core mystery. How do we actually navigate our own minds to reach a flawless verdict? In a world absolutely flooded with endless information, noise, and, let's be honest, hidden motives, judging wisely is maybe the hardest skill to master. Right? How do we make sure that when we look at a situation or a person or a complex problem, we aren't just seeing a warped reflection of what we want to see? The answer lies in the highly disciplined path of the Inspector Inquisitor. We have to learn how to actively decode reality without letting our own mental blinders lead us off track.
Let's crack open the first chapter of our procedural, Case File 1, The Quest for Truth.
Now, the inspector knows that judgment is incredibly powerful. The verdicts we reach, they directly influence our decisions, they shape our entire perception of reality, and they ultimately dictate our actions. You just can't afford to be reckless with your judgment. Because, think about it, a false conclusion doesn't just sit quietly in your head. It ripples out. It actively impacts the people and the environment around you. A truly responsible investigator understands this immense, profound weight from day one.
And that massive responsibility takes us right out into the field. Case File 2, Observing the Scene. So, getting a clear perception demands a really precise methodology. Number 1, observe accurately. That means collecting the raw facts exactly as they are before you slap a good or bad label on them. Number 2, understand context. A sudden shout in a crowded theater means something vastly different than a shout in an empty park, right? Context is everything. And finally, number 3, see beyond appearances. A good inspector knows that things are almost never exactly what they seem at first glance. Clear judgment literally has to begin with this deep, deliberate level of situational awareness.
But as with any good investigation, we're up against a formidable enemy. Case File 3, The Trap of Bias.
To maintain absolute neutrality, we've got to identify our prime suspects of distortion. We're talking about personal assumptions, the urge to jump to quick conclusions, and just a general lack of objectivity. Look, we all love to think we're perfectly rational, but bias is like looking through a completely smudged lens on a magnifying glass. No matter how closely you look at the evidence, the image is always going to be warped. If you walk into a crime scene already assuming you know who's guilty, your brain will actually selectively filter out any evidence that proves you wrong. True judgment demands that you neutralize your own ego and personal history before you even look at the facts.
Once the scene is secure, we take our clues back to the lab. Case File 4, Analyzing the Evidence. Now, there is a stark difference between quick reactions and true investigation. Quick reactions are loud, they're emotionally satisfying in the moment, and they are almost always flawed. True investigation, though, that's quiet, it's methodical. It relies on evaluating evidence from a bunch of different angles. When you just react, you are letting your raw instincts dictate the narrative. But when you investigate, you let the evidence dictate the narrative. It really is the fundamental difference between just guessing and actually knowing.
And to analyze evidence effectively means you have to prioritize deep information gathering over the rush to simply close the case. In our modern world that practically demands instant hot takes and split-second opinions, the Inspector Inquisitor does something totally radical. They slow down. They value depth over speed. Rushing to a verdict might make you feel productive, sure, but if that verdict is wrong, you've failed the most basic duty of the truth seeker. Patience isn't just a nice virtue here. It is an absolute, non-negotiable requirement for accuracy. But slowing down is really only half the battle. Now we arrive at Case File 5, Confronting Blind Spots. This is where it gets tough. An elite truth seeker has to openly admit they don't know everything. The humble investigator absolutely must remain humble, be incredibly open to correction, and fully accept uncertainty. If you are terrified of being wrong, you are never going to be a good judge of the truth, because you'll just bend the facts to protect your ego. Actually, scratch that. True investigation requires you to be thrilled when you discover you were wrong, because hey, it means you're one step closer to what is actually right. You've got to be willing to pivot entirely when new evidence contradicts your working theories. Humility doesn't weaken your judgment, it literally makes it bulletproof.
And finally, we reach the culmination of our procedural, Case File 6,
Reaching the verdict.
Forging a genuinely responsible final verdict requires a very specific alchemy. It requires wisdom. And what is that? It's the combination of knowledge, experience, and reflection. The Inspector Inquisitor doesn't just compile a sterile list of facts and call it a day. Information alone just isn't enough. You have to synthesize that knowledge with your own lived experience and then apply deep, quiet reflection. Only then does that raw data transform into actual wisdom. It's this exact synthesis that allows you to deliver a verdict that isn't just factually accurate, but deeply, genuinely true.
Let's take a step back and look at the whole picture. Here's the complete chronological arc of the Inspector Inquisitor's methodology for uncovering absolute truth: awareness, analysis, humility, and wisdom. It's a really beautiful logical progression. It starts with awareness, seeing things clearly without that smudged lens. Then into analysis, evaluating the evidence with deep patience. It's sustained by humility, the willingness to be totally wrong. And it culminates in wisdom, the thoughtful application of everything you've just discovered. Skip any one of these steps, and your entire investigation collapses. And delivering this verdict carries immense responsibility. Once you arrive at the truth, you have to own it. The inspector takes full responsibility for their decisions and deeply understands their impact out in the real world. The ultimate goal of this entire investigation, from the second we stepped onto the scene to the moment we finally close the file, is fairness. Absolute, uncompromising fairness. You know, you don't investigate to win an argument. You investigate to ensure that reality is honored and justice is actually served.
Let's look at this principle. True judgment is not about certainty, it is about understanding. Think about that for a second. A wise investigator values deep comprehension way above the temporary ego boost of simply being right. Certainty is so often just an illusion, right? It's this rigid little wall we build around ourselves to feel safe. Understanding, on the other hand, is a constantly expanding horizon. The best inspectors out there are entirely okay with nuance, with the messy complexity, and with all those gray areas, just as long as they are genuinely striving to understand the reality of the situation.
So as we close out this explainer, I really want to turn the magnifying glass back onto you. Challenge yourself to reflect on your own investigative capabilities in your everyday life. When you're faced with a new problem, or a conflict at work, or maybe just a really challenging news headline, do you take the time to truly understand, or do you just react quickly? How aware are you of your own biases, your own prime suspects of distortion? The path of the Inspector Inquisitor isn't just some abstract philosophical concept. It is a highly practical, incredibly powerful toolkit for navigating reality. Take these tools, sharpen up your awareness, and start investigating your world with real depth and humility. Until next time, observe carefully, think deeply, and keep seeking the truth.